before I am executed. In a few hours' time, I will be strapped to the chair and electric currents will pass through me. This is my confession, my journey here. When I was first brought to the prison, I was in a state of panic and confusion. Even though I knew I was guilty, in the run up to and all through the trial, I kept telling myself that things would work out, that being out on bail would merge smoothly into a suspended sentence or house arrest after the jury reached their inevitable verdict. As I was led shackled from a van to a cell, it did not seem real. The sentence handed down of 10 years, an aberration. I was in a place of endless corridors, of no natural light, of sliding doors, bars, the stink of chemical toilets and stale sweat. Men shouting, swearing, singing, cajoling. After my first night in prison, I would have happily mutilated myself, pierced my eardrums somehow, if it meant just a few minutes' silence. Then it was lights on, and a new layer of noise was added to the torment of sounds. By the end of my first week inside, I was already afraid of everyone, every situation, constantly on edge, yet trying to hide it, to not show my fear. I knew that exposing any weakness would have brutal consequences. I learned this in an exercise session. For 45 minutes every day, we were herded out of our cells and led into one of the yards that spread out around the grounds of the prison. There were about 20 of us that day. I knew nothing about any of the other men, what their crimes were, their names. They were strangers dressed identically to each other, to me, in the orange jumpsuit you were handed after the introductory cavity search and cold shower. Strangers who were circling listlessly around the yard. One guy was doing press-ups. One was staring up into a gray sky. He looked lost in thought, and then he began to cry. Almost immediately, he was surrounded, and even as they were laughing, the group of men who had descended on him began to kick and punch and spit. I backed away, looking around for the guards, but there was no sign. The beating went on and on. Finally, the group began to peel away. Some of them glanced at me. Were they challenging me to say something? To intervene? I looked down at my feet, tried to spit though my mouth was bone dry, tried to act as if I did not give a damn about what I had just seen. I was grateful when, the session over, we were taken back to our cells and the buzzer went, locking me back in. After 6 months of my sentence, I had a new and welcome element to my routine. Once a fortnight, I had the briefest of respites from the isolation of my cell and the nerve-shredding time when I was with the other prisoners. I had a job in the prison library. Out in the real world, in what felt like a distant, unreal past, I had experience of working in academia, and the prison governor wanted an archive held in the library to be cataloged. The archive was in a separate, windowless, naturally, room, off the main library, and its rows of cheap paperbacks. Documents were piled high, in no order I could see. It was an almighty mess, and the first time I saw it, the dark thoughts dissipated for a moment, and I wondered if I might actually make it out of the prison in one piece at the end of my sentence. Now I had a task, something I could focus on that was not driven by fear. I began to work my way through the documents. There were ledgers, blueprints, photographs, all in complete disarray. I learned over the time that followed that the prison was built on the grounds of a much older facility, one opened a century before. I found a newspaper clipping, yellowed and curling, that showed the very first governor standing proudly in front of a row of guards. There were some mighty impressive mustaches on display. Some of the guards held hefty batons, others cradled shotguns. The governor himself wore a fine-looking suit and was raising a Stetson hat to the camera. I remember thinking how I should try and show this to the current governor. I imagine it is something he would want to frame and put on his wall. And maybe, just maybe, this would leave a legacy of favor for me. Some goodwill stored up. Only then I saw, on the pile where the clipping had been, a photograph. It was old, sepia, and torn in one corner. Having not been exposed to the light would have kept it in better condition, I figured, as I picked it up and examined it, with a growing sense of horror. It showed a line of men hanging from nooses attached to wooden gallows. From other pictures I had seen in the archive, it was clearly taken inside the prison grounds. There were 8 gallows, 8 men. The photograph was taken from ground level, pointing at an angle upwards. The features of the men's faces were vivid. The eyes of some were open, even though they were clearly dead. By far, the worst aspect of the photograph, though, was the prison guards who were gathered in a small group in front of the hanged men. They were frozen in time, patting each other on the back, smiling and laughing. They were having a great old time. Sickened, I put the photograph back down. A constant in the prison routine was the daily exercise sessions. We shuffled out into the yard, some stretching, some complaining, some, as I always did, desperately trying to just keep to themselves. This was by far the worst part of my day. I had come to see over time that there was a tinderbox atmosphere in the yard. These men, many of whom had committed atrocious acts, were set even more on edge out here. I always tried to find a corner where I could look as though I was lazing against a wall, but really, it was so I could try and keep an eye on my fellow inmates. I had witnessed countless more acts of violence here since that first. And when the guards intervened, if they did, they broke things up late and with a sneer on their face. So I pretended to stare into space and watched for signs of imminent danger. Only, after finding the photograph, the yard was a different place to me. I could not stop thinking about the photograph of the hanged men, the laughing guards. The photograph could have been taken in this very spot. The gallows set up just feet away. The image was imprinted on my vision. I tried to bring myself back to the present. Drifting like this, being distracted instead of alert, was dangerous. But I could not stop myself, and I found myself wondering how many more acts of evil must have been committed here over the decades since the prison was founded. Of how evil must have become part of the very fabric of this place. Another month or so before I realized how far the evil had reached, how it had changed the prison and everyone and everything in it. I stretched my neck, trying to ease a crick out of it as I stepped into the yard. By now, I recognized most of the other men. I took it all in, checked who was there, careful never to make eye contact. There was one I knew I needed to be extra cautious around. He was wiry, shaven-headed, with a tattoo curling up the left side of his neck. I had watched him dole out plenty of beatings, had once seen him bite a man's nose clean off. I put as much distance between myself and him as I could in the confined space. My guts tightened the moment the other prisoner strode into the yard. I had never seen him before. He was 6'5" plus, bulked up, and he had a serious attitude. I figured he was new and wanted to make a statement. Some guys, like me, when they first enter the population, withdraw into their shells and hope no one notices us. Others try and rise to the occasion. They want to show how hard they are, how messing with them will be a bad idea. He strutted over towards the wiry man. Maybe he had heard the wiry man was someone you needed to be afraid of, which, in his mind, translated into, Someone I need to defeat. He came up close to the wiry man, who had his back turned, had not seen, and punched him in the kidneys, kneed him in the anus, and, as the wiry man folded over from the impacts, drove the point of his elbow down onto the wiry man's neck. The wiry man collapsed, lay there, breathing heavily. The other man whipped it out slow and lazy, and urinated on the prone figure. No one moved. No one else wanted to get involved, least of all the guards, who had seen everything. They were probably placing bets as they whispered to each other. I did not see the wiry man produce the shiv. He must have had it hidden inside his jumpsuit. There it was, though. A narrow, ragged 6-inch blade. He held it in his hand. His hand shook. His face was red and contorted with rage as he looked up at his attacker, who simply stood there and smiled. A smile that, to my amazement, the wiry man mirrored. He smiled, and twisting the hand holding the shiv so that his palm was facing upwards. Then he released the grip on the shiv so that it was resting on the palm of his hand. The evil has spread. It has distorted. It has transformed. The shiv rose slowly from the opened hand of the wiry man. It levitated 6 feet, more, into the air. It hovered there, and we all watched dumbstruck. Even the man who until moments ago must have thought he was top dog now. The point of the shiv was in line with his throat. It flashed forward, propelled by whatever unseen, unimaginable force had caused it to rise and be held in place, suspended in the air. It flew across the yard and pierced the man's neck, penetrating the full length of the blade. Then, the handle began to turn, clockwise and back again. The man fell to his knees, and I could see that he was dead before his face hit the ground. No one said a damn thing. The wiry man, still smiling, climbed to his feet and started walking slowly back to the yard entrance. The guards opened the door for him, and I saw him lean over and speak in one of their ears. A few weeks later, after a short trial, I was transferred to death row. I don't know why I was chosen, why I was made the scapegoat, but all the guards, all the other prisoners said I had attacked the man with the shiv, murdered him. I tried to explain what I had seen, what had really happened, but all I got was looks that said, "You are crazy." It is stifling hot in the dozen units that make up death row. The lights in my ceiling make a constant buzzing noise and are never turned off. The evil seeps through every one of my final moments. The guard who brought my last meal, decorated with his waist. The reverend who said he was here to help me beg for forgiveness. His cheeks were flushed, and as he spoke, he paused every now and then to pass his tongue over his lips. It is almost midnight, which is when I will take the short walk to the chair. If I had been asked before, I would have said that once the currents had finished with a man, then that would be the end of him. That there is nothing of a man which lingers. Now? I do not know. Will I become part of the all-pervading evil that guides those within the walls of the prison to commit obscenely vicious acts? The evil that has become so powerful as it has built and built over 100 years that it has rotted away the boundaries of what is possible. I can hear the guard coming for me, the keys rattling on his belt. There's only one chance for me to add one final recollection to my confession. There was a second photograph I found in the archive. It was in color. It showed the execution of a single inmate. Guards were gathered around him, watching, smiling. The gallows rising overhead. His feet dangled above the ground as he was suspended in the air. There was no rope, no noose holding him there. These are my last words. It's time now for me to die.